All right. So today, the first thing we will do is we'll try to build a Bloom filter or construct a Bloom filter, and then try testing it in some sense. Of course, we are not going to do it with exactly streaming data, which is very large and so on. So we'll try it in a smaller scale, but we'll get the idea of why that works in the larger scale, for which it is really required. So let's see. Can you see the slide? See the Safari window, the Python notebook.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me clear everything that I have done before. So Bloom filter. So we will refer to the lecture slides whenever required. The first thing we need is we'll need a family of hash functions and a bit array, right? So we'll have a bit array, and then we'll hash every element to one bit of that array and make that bit one, right? So if you remember Bloom filter. So let's start with that. So I'll run the first thing. So the hash function that we can use, it's actually a commonly used hash function, which is very efficient, very fast. It's called Murmur hash 3 or MMH3. So 3 is just for version 3. There was version 1 and version 2 before. So what we will do, let's just first get used to the hash function and the bit array um, libraries. All that we need is just hash them once. So what it does is you can pass an item or a string rather, the input, and a seed. Okay. So if you pass the same seed and same input, of course the hash value will be the same, but with a different seed, it will produce a different hash value. So what we can use then, with a different seed, we can treat it as a different hash function, okay, which is independent of the of the previous one, right? So let's just test that. Of course, we're not going to test independence, but we'll just quickly see what happens. So this, we import MMH3, and let's say we hash MMH3, this input ISI Kolkata with seed 1 and 2, and then again 1. So you see, the with 1 it produces the same result, but with seed 2 it produces a different result. Okay. Yeah, so that's the first step. Then we will use the bit array. It's from Python package index PyPy. So we'll use the bit array package. So a bit array is just an array of bits where true, false, or binary bits, right? So true, false, or 1, 0 bits. The good thing is it doesn't, each array element does not take as much as an integer. It takes actually as much as space as 1 bit. So let's do an initial test. So if we initialize a bit array with bit array 10, then it will actually initialize a bit array of size 10, right? If we set all of the bits to 0, then it will actually set all of the bits to 0, and then we can actually choose to set any of the bits to 1. Okay, so let's actually do that. So you see the initial one is a size 10 bit array, but it's random kind. I mean, we don't have control over this, but we can set all of them to 0. And then let's say from index 0, the third one we have set to 1 here, right? So that also we can do. Okay, so now we'll come to we are now ready to write. It's a very simple implementation of Bloom filter. So we are ready to implement the Bloom filter class. Okay, so remember that in Bloom filter we have 3 parameters. One is the number of items in our member set. Everybody remembers this, right? Or do I need to refer to the slides? If yes, then just tell me. I will quickly show you that. Okay, so the number of items, the number of bits in our bit array, and the number of hash functions we are using, right? So yeah, it's just this, I'm writing it as a class. If you're not used to object oriented programming in Python, it's not that difficult. So how many of you are not used to object oriented programming with Python? Can you raise hands? Raise hands in the Zoom. You can actually, there's something called raise hands. How many of you are not used to object oriented programming in Python?
I am not used to.
Okay, so how many of you are not used to Python at all? Is there anybody? Hope not. Okay, so all of you know Python, but a few of you are not used to object-oriented programming. So it's, I mean, we'll of course not get into the details of that, but it should be possible to explain this code to you from this code. Okay, so let me actually. So this class Bloom filter, this is how we will construct it. Okay, so if you have done any other object-oriented programming, you will know. Otherwise, it is just you will construct it with these three these three parameters, let's say n items, n bits, and n hash. So n number of items, number of bits, and number of hash functions. And then the object will know that the number of bits for this instantiation is this much, number of hashes is this, and it will actually create a bit array of this size. Okay, and it will set all bits to 0. Okay, so that's what it will do. Okay, initially we'll actually see that when it does it below there. Then we need two functions. One is add an element. Okay, this is in our construction phase. We have a set of members which we call valid or whatever. In our particular example of email addresses, we call them valid. So we have a set of members. We'll have to add each of them. That means we'll have to hash each of those members using each of the hash functions and set the corresponding hashed bit to 1. So what we are doing for I in range self dot n hash. So this self basically means these are variables belonging to this object. Okay, so whenever you say self dot n hash, it means for this Bloom filter object, what is the number of hash functions? Okay, so I in range self dot n hash value. We'll call this mmh3 dot hash item comma I is the seed. So essentially, if we use let's say 10 hash functions, then we'll run from 0 to 9 and we'll pass the seed 0 to 9. So that means for every item, it will be hashed 10 times. And for all the times, we'll set the hash value. That means that particular bit, okay, to true or 1, whatever. So essentially, we are hashing with different hash functions, and that particular bit we are setting to 1. Okay. So this is basically, if we run add on all our items, we will be done with our construction phase. Then our Bloom filter is ready with some ones and some zeros bits to test a new element, right? Okay, is this kind of understandable? I mean, if you have slight problems with the syntax of the code, don't worry about it, but you got the basic idea of what is happening here, right?
Sir, just in that initialization part, def underscore init underscore self comma n items, n bits, and n hash. N bits refers to that bits that you in the theory class. N hash is the number of hash functions, and n items refers to
the number of items in my number of email addresses. Let's say that's what.
Okay, number of documents.
Yeah, whatever number of elements that we know.
Okay.
Right. And then a new element will come, and we need to check whether I have seen this. It belongs to my known set.
Okay.
Right. So that known set is the size of the known set is my number of elements.
Okay.
Okay. So for all the functions, you need a self here because you will have to refer to the self dot something something. So essentially, the number of parameters for add is just 1. Okay. So self is implicit, number of parameters for test is also 1, and so on. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are doing hash value equal to, we are hashing, and then we are taking mod self.n bits, which means just in case our number of bits is not that large, okay, and it hashes to a value which is larger than our number of bits, then it will actually go out of the index of the bit array, right? So it is just to take care of that part. Okay, so then the test part, so the init, the construction, and the add will basically be our the construction phase. So essentially, yes, it will be our construction phase, and then once that is done, we are then ready to test new elements. So it's basically the same thing. Again, we'll hash with all the hash functions with the same seeds, by the way. So MMH3 with a particular seed defines one unique hash function. So again, the same seed, I in range self.n hash. Okay, so same seed, and same way we get generate the hash value. So if some element was seen before, it will generate the same hash value. And if the self.bits is equal to 0, then we surely know that we have not seen this element before. For any of the hash functions, if it goes to a 0 bit, we know that we haven't seen it before. So we report negative, and this is a guaranteed negative. However, if that does not happen, if it goes to 1 for all of them, then we report positive, and this may be a mistake. Okay. Of course, we did our probabilistic analysis and figured that with proper choices of number of bits and number of hash functions, we can keep this error rate very low. All right. So I guess, yeah, so I guess this looks okay. So what we'll do is we will actually.
Sorry, sir. One question. You can just remove n items from the init part because you do not need it anywhere inside the code, inside all the other functions. For example, add and test.
Oh, right. That's true. Yeah, this I can remove. That is true. Okay, that's good. Thank you. So let me then run this again. Let me also run this again. Right. Okay, so this n items is actually not there. So thank you. So then what we do now, of course, you can test with anything, right? So all you need is a huge number of elements. Okay, huge number of some strings to first build your Bloom filter. So again, n items I actually didn't need, but I will need this. It's approximately these many. So I downloaded some words.txt containing, approximately those many English words, and I consider the words as our member set. So then I will construct some word new, and I'll just check whether this is one of my known words. Okay, so that's how I'm going to synthesize testing. So yeah, so this will actually come in handy for our estimate. I mean, what should be the probability of false positive? So let's just keep it here. But obviously, for constructing the Bloom filter, I don't need it, which makes sense because yeah, the Bloom filter doesn't need to know how many are there. So it just needs to know how many hash functions and how many bits are there. So, but then given, but the number of bits we choose, you remember the analysis that we want the number of bits per element to be at least 8 or 10 or something. So I have taken something like a 12. Okay. So n bits is n items times 12, and let's say 15 hash functions. Okay. So we can actually play around a bit with this and see what happens. All right. So now we have initialized the Bloom filter. For those who did not know the object-oriented part, after running this, my Bloom filter object already has a bit array for which all the bits are set to 0. And the size of the bit array is this times 12. Okay. Now, I will kind of simulate stream. So of course, I mean, you can read some text file using Python in a much more sophisticated way, but because I want to simulate a stream without really loading things into a memory, what I do, I simply open a file, count equal to 0, as long as the file is there, or the count is count crosses my number of items, I keep reading, okay, and I add the word to the filter, and then I close the file. So what will this do? Every time I add the word to the filter, okay, this will set a number of bits to 1. Okay, it will set a number of bits to 1. Maybe those bits are already 1 for some cases. All right, so let's actually do that. So there are about 500,000 of them. So this is the construction of Bloom filter phase, and it's done. Okay, obviously I'm not trying things with very large data sets here because I want to quickly show you things, but in reality you will actually find it more interesting with a much larger data. Okay, so now I already have the Bloom filter with my 10 bits, and now we'll test for false positive. So we already know that um, an element which is, if I declare something as a negative, then it's clearly a negative. If a word is actually present, it will definitely declare it as a positive, right? So that will not be a false negative. Okay, if I declare, if the some word is actually present, it will definitely declare as a positive. So what only thing we want to test is, we want to synthesize words which are not present, and we want to see in how many of those cases our filter declares it as present. So what we will do is, yeah, actually I have not done the suffix part. So what we will do is, we'll just add some junk. We'll add some junk with our same file. We'll add some junk prefix. Okay, so I just inverted the word Bloom and add that prefix before every word, and that basically means that word cannot be present. Okay, so add the prefix before everyone. Hopefully in most cases it will actually not be present. So let's just think that if I do this, open the same file, and for all the words I add the prefix before the actual word, then all my examples are actual negatives, true negatives. Okay, so let's assume that maybe, it could, yeah, in very odd cases, maybe this is, and this word is there in the dictionary, maybe not. Okay, so then what I do, I increment count, I keep a count, and I also count false positives. This is straightforward. Is present equal to Bloom filter dot test word. Okay, so if this is true, then the Bloom filter says that it is present. If it is present, then my false positive increases by 1, because I know it should not be present. Okay, and that's it. So then I can actually print out my percentage of false positives. So percentage of false positives will be count false positives times 100 by count. Let's do that. Yeah. So percentage of false positives for my choice of number of bits and number of hash functions is 0.65. 0.65%, that means the fraction is actually 0.0065. So what should have been my expected probability by our theoretical calculation? So that should have been this formula, 1 minus e power number of hash functions times number of items by number of bits to the power number of hash functions. So that should have been around 0.63. So this is, we are doing pretty much what we should get, right? Okay, so everybody understood this pattern. It's a very easy implementation. I will actually give you some other of these kind of things just to validate your concepts by easy implementation as an assignment. But this one I just did myself. Let us actually test with a little bit other things. So let's test with the number of hash functions to be 30, and let's keep the number of bits the same. So let's say if we do this. Okay. Now, of course, this means we are actually doing it with more number of hash functions, and it should actually take more time.
The number of false positives should also increase.
Yes, because it depends on that graph, right? You remember, if you refer to the slide, in this case, unfortunately, our number of false positives will increase. Yes, it's 7%, 7.66%, and that is what is also expected. The expected error probability is also 7.65%. So yeah, so the 15 was actually better. So essentially, what it means is that this is very reliable. You can get your optimal, as we described in the class before, you can get your optimal number of, optimal number of bits and number of hash functions here. You can actually put it as 15. What happens if we increase this to 20 number of bits? Okay, so if we increase that, then maybe we will not suffer. Of course, we are taking larger memory, but let's say what? Yeah, see, this is a much better scenario. See, with 12 times the number of elements, we had a 0.65% error rate. Here, this is a 0.005% error rate. Okay, and yeah, so the actual, the expected should have been 0.007. Well, we got 0.006. Okay, I mean, with another run, you can get a different one, but pretty much the same. So you see that what suffices is if you take the number of bits to be around 20 times, 15, 20 times the number of items, then even with a small number of hash functions, let's say even 10, okay, even with 10 hash functions, which will make it faster, okay, which will make it faster. Yeah, I mean, you can do pretty good. So 007, 005, and now 008. So you can actually achieve excellent error rate. All right, everybody, is this clear? Okay, so another, for those who are not already extremely familiar with all these functions and so on, the takeaway from this is not only the Bloom filter, but also how you use hash functions, because for all your things that we have been doing so far, hash function, we have been coming again and again, right? So bit array and hash functions are two small libraries you learned today. Okay, fine, everybody. So now then we can move to another one, which is not so great. Like Bloom filter is wonderful. We will also do the Flageolet-Martin algorithm today, but unfortunately the Flageolet-Martin algorithm, we'll see the results will vary a bit more. Well, we'll get the idea that it is actually predicting things somewhat, but we'll see that the results will vary a bit more. Okay, so let me then move on to that. Let me clear all the output. So I'll definitely share the Python notebooks with you. You may have to, with pip and so on, you may have to install these libraries, but let's actually. So number of distinct elements, okay? Yeah. So yeah, I will, before I share with you, I will actually write down the notes and things like that here. But since I'm here right now, I can actually explain as I go on. But if you just look at it independently, it may be hard for you to read. So same, again, the same things. You remember Flageolet-Martin algorithm? The idea here was every element is hashed to a number or a bit string, a binary number or a bit string, and then you check how many zeros are there at the end. That means the tail length of the bit string. And as you keep seeing more and more elements, you simply keep track of the maximum tail length seen so far. And then we showed that 2 power that maximum tail length can act as an estimate of the number of distinct elements we have seen. All right, okay. So and so the number of bits to choose was, well, for a very large number of distinct elements, we said number of bits to choose should be like a 64. That means there are 2 power 64 possible bit strings. Let's work with 32 for now. We can actually vary things out a bit. Again, let's first test small building blocks of what we want to do. Okay, so solve small building blocks. If first of all we have to write down, we have to implement a hash function which will hash a string to a random bit string of size 32, or rather a random number of between 0 and 2 power, I mean between 0 and 2 power 32 minus 1. So that essentially is this, right? So if you forget the bin part here, so this mmh3.hash item, again give it a seed, okay, because we will not be happy with one hash function, we will actually need several hash functions, mod 2 power n bits minus 1. Okay, it actually can be 2 power n bits just basically, right? If I'm right about this, yeah, should be just 2 power n bits. I don't really need 2 power n bits minus 1 here. So right, so this if n bits is 32, and then bin function essentially converts it to binary. So let's actually, we'll test it with some strings here and see how it works. And then the tail length. So once we have a binary string, oh, just a moment, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, fine. So once we have a binary string, we need to compute its tail length. So what we do, we actually measure the length of the string, and then we measure the length of the string after stripping the zeros from the right. All right, so this is my tail length. Okay, so let's actually run these two and then test. Let's say this is the input string, and with different speeds, let's just test how. Let's do it 15 times. So let's do 15 times. So just to check that our binary hashing to a bit string and tail length computations are correct. So this is a 0B. Okay, then you should have a 32 bits here, and here you have 1 0, so the tail length is 1, right? Here you have no 0, tail length is 0. You have 1 0. Let's take a look at this one maybe. So you have 3 zeros here, so tail length is 3, and so on. Right? So this is working fine for different hashing. This is all fine. Now, yeah, this okay. So this is actually not important. This is just the NumPy aggregator part. Now we are ready to implement our Flageolet-Martin estimator. Again, I mean, when I started implementing, I have given all the things as inputs. I think n bits, yeah, n bits will also be required here in hash and in groups. So remember, what we need to do, one hash function will not be enough. One hash function, well, obviously 2 power r can suddenly be very small or very large for some particular random hashing, right? So what we'll do, we'll actually group. So let's say we'll take 20 hash functions and we'll group them into groups of 4, and for each 5 we'll take the average, and then for each group, I mean 4 groups, we'll take the median. There is actually another approach to that. Do the opposite. You first take the median and then take the average. Okay, so there is another approach to that. So let's yeah, so let's see which one works better. So the book by Leskovec, Rajaramon and Ullman, they say you take average within every group and then take the median of each average, median of the averages. But I just checked in other literature, some other places, they do the opposite. And maybe there are reasons for that. So we will actually try to figure out how good this works or it doesn't. Now I have just rewritten the functions again here, tail length and Flageolet-Martin hash in a little bit different way. The functions are the same. Let's actually do this. Yeah, let's actually do this. The functions are the same, but these two are the same. Here what we do, obviously, we initialize self.n bits and self.n hash and n groups, and then we initialize a matrix of max tail length, which we initialize to 0. Okay, it will have these many rows and these many columns. Okay, so essentially it's a NumPy array, 2-dimensional NumPy array, where on one side you will have, I mean, on one side you will average, on other side you will do median, or the opposite. You essentially have a group of groups.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interrupt, but can you just again explain the concept of groups?
Oh yeah. So let's actually then go back to the slide for a moment, and then it will probably be better. Let me just go back to the slide. Just a moment. Yes. Okay. So this part we kind of did that. We figured that very vaguely 2 power r is between what would send the probability to 1 and what will send the probability to 0. So 2 power r can be used as an estimate, but it's a this estimate has very high variance. Okay, so this estimate has extremely high variance. So one hash function will definitely not do a good job in most cases. So what should we do? Our standard thumb rule is, by now we are used to it for the last few weeks, take many hash functions and combine their estimates, right, in some way. So one hash function will be unreliable, hence use many hash functions. That's the usual practice. We'll combine the values of 2 power r to obtain the estimate. How should we combine? Should we take the average of the 2 power r's obtained by different hash functions? Well, what if we just take the average? You know, you do it with 10 hash functions, and for each hash function gives us a maximum tail length seen so far, and we take the, that is the r, and we take 2 power r, and we take the 2 power r over all the hash functions, the average of that. So let's say the actual number of distinct elements be m. Then for some r which is more than, which will give us an estimate more than this m, the estimate for r corresponding to r is 2 power r, right? So for some r which will give us a very high estimate, okay, that also can happen. So that it is possible that some element has tail length at that much, right? So it's possible to have a high estimate. So what is the possibility of having that high overestimate? So let probability of some element having a tail length r be p. Okay, so let that probability be p. Then the probability of some element having tail length r plus 1 is greater than or equal to p by 2, because that just means another bit is also 0. I mean, up to r bits from the right are 0, but if that probability is p, then another bit being 0 is probability is half into that. So that is greater than p by 2, greater than or equal to p by 2, and so on. So which means the expected value of 2 power r then will be the probability that the value is 2 power r. So p is the probability the value is 2 power r, and so on. So the p is the p by 2 is the probability that the value is 2 power r plus 1. Actually, it should have been r plus 1, but then even this much, even if you don't put an r plus 1 here, even this much diverges to infinity. That means expected value of 2 power r is not even my m. So I'm happy with a high variance, maybe. Okay, maybe we can take a lot of them and hope that the variance will be taken care of. But well, the expected, even the mean is not coming to m. Right? So this is not a good estimate at all. So this is a very biased estimator. So those who have done some statistics, you would relate to that statement, but intuitively, basically, this will not do a good estimate. So hence, the average is not a right way to combine. So what should we do? Should we take a median? Yes, medians are better, because a slight, so some outlier which has a outlier gives some outlier element which suddenly gives you a high r, and then 2 power r becomes an exponentially high overestimate. Median will take care of that, because it can take care of low and high sides, right? But then only median, the problem with the only median, the problem is it is always some power of 2. So your results will always be either 1024 or 2048 or 4096 and things like that. So you are never able to estimate something in middle. So that's why what people do is they combine average and median. So they make groups of hash functions, and so they take averages of each group and median of the averages. So something like this. Let's say I have 5 hash functions in every group. For every group, I take the average of the 2 power r's, and then from the averages, I take the median. Now, as I just mentioned, this is what the textbook, or this is what the book by Ullman and others mention. But there are other places where they mention the opposite. I have not actually looked up what the original authors did, but this is a very old algorithm, right? So it's a very old algorithm where being able to estimate something was even good. we should take it with the perspective that when is this kind of algorithm useful. So what the other approach is, instead of taking averages of groups, you take medians of groups and then take the average of the medians. So this will also be the same. This will also take care of the problem, because the median of every group will cancel out extreme outliers, and then you take the average so that your estimate is not one of the two power r's. Okay, so this is what the grouping is for. Now let's go back to.
So the grouping is random.
Grouping is not random, it's pre-decided, right? So you pre-decide. So let's actually see what we have done here. You pre-decide your seeds. Now obviously the assumption is that whatever the seed is, it is the hashing is random, right? So yeah, so what I'm doing here is I'm setting self dot max tail length to be np dot zeros this. So let's actually print this. Okay, so we'll actually go step by step. We'll see how it looks like. Okay, and then I'm doing two kinds of estimates, but we'll see that later. Okay, we'll see the estimates later. We'll see the estimates later. Let's actually see what we are doing. So this is the tail length and this is the hashing, no problem. What is the add function doing? Add function is essentially compute the max tail length for all the hash functions of this element. Okay, and increase the max tail length if it is larger than what we have seen so far. But this we have to do for all the hash functions. So for every hash function, it's not one hash function, so it's not enough to maintain one tracker. We're actually maintaining a matrix of trackers, right? So for I in range self dot main hash, for j in range self dot n groups. So you can actually do the transpose. That doesn't matter. I've just printed a hash. I've just computed a hash sequence. So it should be like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12, or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. So I row wise or column wise, whatever it is, you have to go one of the ways. So I start self dot min hash plus j. Then the bit string is you hash it with the item and the hash sequence. So this is my seed. My seed should not be same for any two hash functions, right? Then they are actually acting as the same hash function. So that's why the hash sequence is important. And then tail length is self dot tail length bit string. And if tail length is greater than the self dot tail length of the ij corresponding to this ij, then I update the tail length. All right. So let's actually, let's run this. And before coming to the estimates, let me just run this much first. So what you see is I'm actually taking a 64-bit bit strings. Okay, so each hash value will actually be a 64-bit bit string. And let's say I'm taking 5 rows and 5 columns. Instead, maybe let me take 5 rows and 6 columns. Okay, so basically 5 in each group and 6 groups of hash functions. Initially, all maximum tail lengths are 0, right? Initially, all maximum tail lengths are 0. And now I'm going to do the following. So now I'm going to actually, now this may not actually be a good way of doing this. Taking a real data should be a better way of doing this. Okay. But I was trying to do this quickly, so I did this. So what you can try is you can actually try loading a large amount of maybe distinct words or distinct numbers, but don't just generate randomly. Okay, if you generate randomly from a uniform distribution, you are actually likely to get a very spread out thing. So your number of distinct count is not that interesting anymore. So this is actually not a good way of doing it, but just let's run the code. So I'm actually generating a number, okay, below 100,000, so below 1 lakh, random integer, and I'm passing it through the Flageolet-Martin estimator. And I'm also keeping track of a dictionary which will count the actual number of distinct elements. Well, obviously, this is just to test how good the algorithm works. But in reality, if your number of distinct elements is too large, this dictionary will become slow, right? So that is the whole idea when you should use this algorithm, right? So when you can do this with a dictionary in reasonable time, you should not use a Flageolet-Martin estimator. So when your number of distinct elements is likely to be millions or billions and things like that, and your data is coming very fast, then you should use this kind of an estimator. All right, but here we are just testing. So then I have two kinds of estimates. So let's just go back to the estimate part here. So one estimate is you take average of every group and take the median of the averages. Oh, sorry, both cases I actually, yeah, right. And then the other estimate is you take a median of every group and you take mean of the medians. Okay, yeah, I think I didn't mix it up. Yeah, right, I think this is fine. And in both cases, I'm taking axis 0, it doesn't matter. I mean, whether you group row wise or column wise makes no difference because your hash functions are supposed to be independent. Okay, so yeah, so I have run this already. Now let me actually run this and let's see what happens. All right, so as you see, the second estimate, so the actual number of distinct elements is about 9,500. So I actually did it for 10,000 elements. So there are some duplicates by chance. So actual number of distinct elements is now 9,500. And my estimate comes out to be around 12,000. The estimate 2, I ran it quite a few times, and estimate 2 actually performs better. Estimate 1 overestimates most of the time. The reason being, if you average first, let's say if you average a group of 5 2 power r's initially, then one of them will actually lead you to a high estimate. And then you take the median, so you are actually staying at the high estimate. Okay, but if you take the median first, contrary to what the Leskovec, Rajaraman, Ullman book says, if you take the median first, it actually works better. Okay, so to actually get better understanding of this, one needs to look into the probabilistic theory that is behind this paper. But okay, maybe we'll not actually get into that. Yeah. So Rishi has a question. Rishi and Arnav both have questions.
Sir, please print the matrix after the loop is complete.
Yes. Let's do that. So maybe let's actually print the matrix in both estimates, right?
Yes.
No, one estimate is enough.
Yeah.
Right, just one estimate is enough. So after the loop is, after the loop is complete, if I print it here, that should be all right, right?
No, sir, actually, also I want to see the testing algorithm part.
Right. So this is what is happening. So I don't need to print the initial part because you all know it's 0. Right. So this testing part is, this is what, right? If I print it here, after, oh, no. This will print it so many times. I'm sorry. It should be printed. This will print it 10,000 times. So it should be printed somewhere here, but it's not self anymore. Right? Should this work?
Yes.
Okay. It's not a private thing, right? I'm so used to Java that the Python object-oriented part confuses me. So I don't know whether this will give me a private exception. Otherwise, we have to. Yeah. Okay. Let me actually run it once more. Yeah. Okay. So this the matrix becomes like this. So these are my R's, maximum tail length seen so far. Now, if I take the medians first, then the average, we are going to get something. If I take the averages first, average means not the average of 15, 12, 14, and so on. We're going to take the average of 2 power r's. So the averages are actually going to be very large, right? So then we are going to get something else, right? Another possibility is maybe you, instead of taking the average of 2 power r's, you take the average of r's and then take 2 power. But these are just playing around with the things. It is better to look into this. So in all my tests that I have done since yesterday, when I was preparing this, I figured the second option works much better. Okay, because I'm actually taking it from only 10,000 or something like that, my actual number is always a bit less. So there is always a little bit of overestimate, but the second number always works much better. Second estimate, you first take the median and then take the average of the medians. All right, so that's what this algorithm does. Now let's put this into perspective. This algorithm is not to be used when you have a scenario like this, 10,000 elements, even 100,000 elements. But when you really have a scenario, you actually want to count the number of distinct words when you may have a huge data, gigabytes of data, right? Then to count the number of distinct words, you may actually have to uh, sort the whole data, right? Or do a map reduce kind of thing and so on, right? So that is very hard. Instead, you could get a reasonable estimate using this kind of an algorithm, right? So that is the point. It's not to be run when you have 100,000, 10,000 elements or 100,000 elements. It is to be run when you have gigabytes of data with so many elements, and definitely not all of them are distinct. So yeah, maybe, that will not be an assignment. I have already implemented. This is very easy. So what, and I have actually been late to give you the assignment. There's so many things have been going on, but I will make it a point to finish that up by the weekend. So what I'm going to do, I will give you an assignment to implement mean hashing pretty much from the scratch. So mean hashing obviously has a lot more, right? So first you will have to make shingles, and then, so I will actually create a Jupyter notebook like this, step by step, so that I will also give you the functions which you have to implement, and you simply implement the functions. So that will be your assignment. So mean hashing, a particular application of mean hashing. So instead of doing that myself as a hands-on, I'll give you that as an assignment. All right, any other question immediately?
Sir, Monday we are having a test.
Right, Monday we are having a test on Monday, 2:15 p.m. I repeat, please take care of the timing. I will send you the question paper 5 minutes before, because you have to write down your name and email address and roll number, right? So 2:10, I'll send you the question paper, and 2:45, I mean 2:45, I will actually close the form, which means after that you won't be able to submit. Please do not take a chance. Assume that it is 2:40 and not 2:45. So after 2:40, have a quick look and submit. Okay. So please do that. The reason of doing this is I have done, so previously what I have done is I have opened a Zoom call. Everybody's on the Zoom call, and I have been asking people, have you all finished? Have you all finished? And people never finish. They go on and on and on, takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes and so on. So that's very unfair to the people who have finished it early. So we'll actually fix it. The quiz will be short. So ideally you don't really need that much time. Okay. So that is the whole idea. So Monday we have the quiz, and Tuesday we'll start a new topic. And yeah, maybe again, after 3-4 classes, we'll do another hands-on session as when required. And I'm definitely going to send you the first assignment. So the quizzes will come. Quizzes will make some portion of the weightage. The midsem is gone, right? So midsem will not be there. So quizzes will actually probably replace the midsem, and the assignments will also have portion of the weightage. So far, the assumption is that endsem will actually happen. We don't know whether that will happen or not. So we'll think about that later, as per the instructions from the dean's office.
Sir, classes will continue till January or
Okay, just a moment. So let me, let's stop the recording. I will actually, let me pull up the academic calendar that I had. Okay, just a moment. I'll show you.